Security guard kicked out the homeless man who had just bought the entire mall when Paul Walker walked into Grandview Shopping Center on a cold November morning, wearing torn clothing and carrying a worn backpack. The head of security took one look at him and decided he didn't belong. What started as a routine removal of an unwanted person turned into the most humiliating moment of that security guard's career when he discovered the truth about who he'd just thrown out and what that man had done just 1 hour earlier. Before we dive into this extraordinary story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy these powerful tales of unexpected twists and important life lessons, make sure to subscribe because tomorrow we have another incredible story that will absolutely change how you see the world. Grandview Shopping Center had seen better days. Once the crown jewel of commercial real estate in suburban Los Angeles, it had slowly declined over 15 years as newer, shinier malls opened nearby. Now it stood half-empty with vacant storefronts outnumbering operating businesses, cracked tiles in the walkways, flickering fluorescent lights, and an atmosphere of quiet desperation. The few remaining shop owners were hanging on by threads, paying reduced rent to a corporate landlord that had lost interest in maintaining the property years ago. But Grandview held something special beneath its faded exterior. It was located in a neighborhood that was gentrifying rapidly, surrounded by new apartment complexes and trendy restaurants. The land itself was worth a fortune. Multiple developers had approached the current owners with offers, but each time the corporation had refused, holding out for even higher prices while letting the actual mall deteriorate. Richard Morrison had been head of security at Grandview for 12 years. He was 53 years old, divorced, living in a studio apartment he could barely afford, and deeply bitter about how his life had turned out. He'd once dreamed of being a police officer, but had failed the academy's psychological evaluation twice. Security work was supposed to be temporary, a stepping stone to something better. Instead, it had become his entire identity. The uniform, the authority, the power to tell people what to do. These were the only things that made Richard feel important anymore. Richard had developed a particular obsession over the years with keeping undesirable elements out of Grandview. Despite the mall's obvious decline, despite the lack of customers, despite the fact that more foot traffic of any kind would actually help the struggling businesses, Richard patrolled the premises like he was guarding Fort Knox. Teenagers who looked too rowdy, removed, people who appeared homeless, banned, anyone who didn't fit Richard's narrow definition of an appropriate customer, escorted out. The few remaining shop owners had complained about Richard's aggressive tactics. Maria Rodriguez, who ran a small jewelry repair kiosk, had argued that he was driving away potential customers. Tom Chen, owner of the struggling bookstore on the second floor, had directly told management that Richard's behavior was making the mall's reputation even worse, but corporate didn't care enough to intervene, and Richard interpreted their indifference as approval. It was 9:15 on a Tuesday morning when Paul Walker's car pulled into the nearly empty Grandview parking lot. He'd been up since 5 a.m., in meetings with lawyers and financial advisors, finalizing the paperwork for what was possibly the most important real estate acquisition of his life. At 8 a.m., in a downtown law office, Paul had signed the documents that made him the sole owner of Grandview Shopping Center. The purchase price was $42 million, paid in full, transferred electronically while Paul sat in a leather chair drinking terrible office coffee and thinking about all the possibilities this space represented. But Paul hadn't bought Grandview because he wanted to own a mall. He'd bought it because of what it could become, a community center that would serve the rapidly changing neighborhood, provide affordable retail space for local entrepreneurs, offer job training programs for people trying to rebuild their lives, and create a genuine gathering place that prioritized people over profit. Paul had been developing this vision for months, working with urban planners, community organizers, and nonprofit leaders to design something that could be both financially sustainable and socially transformative. After the purchase was finalized, Paul had driven straight to Grandview. He wanted to walk through the space as its owner, to see it with fresh eyes, to start envisioning the changes that would begin in just a few weeks. But before heading to the mall, Paul had made one stop. For the past 3 hours before the lawyers' meeting, he'd been at a homeless shelter downtown, serving breakfast and talking with residents about their experiences. He'd been doing this volunteer work every Tuesday for the past year, and he wasn't going to stop just because he had a major business transaction scheduled. The shelter work was physically demanding. Paul had helped in the kitchen, carried heavy trays, cleaned tables, and spent time sitting with people who society had largely forgotten, listening to their stories and treating them with the dignity they deserved but rarely received. By the time he left the shelter to go sign the Grandview papers, his clothes were stained with food, his hair was disheveled, and he looked exhausted because he was, after the paperwork was completed, Paul had intended to go home and change before visiting the mall. But his lawyer had mentioned that the current management company was supposed to empty their offices today, and Paul wanted to make sure the transition went smoothly. So instead of changing, he'd grabbed an old backpack from his car, thrown in the folder containing his ownership documents, and headed straight to Grandview, wearing the same worn jeans, faded sweatshirt, and old sneakers he'd been wearing at the shelter. As Paul walked toward the mall entrance, he was thinking about the families he'd met that morning at the shelter. A single mother with 3 kids who'd lost her housing after a medical emergency, an elderly veteran who'd been on the streets for 2 years, a young man who'd aged out of foster care with nowhere to go. These were the people Paul wanted to serve with this project. These were the lives he wanted to impact. Richard Morrison was standing just inside the main entrance, sipping his 3rd coffee of the morning and watching the parking lot with suspicious eyes. When he saw the figure approaching the doors, every alarm in his security guard brain started firing. The guy looked homeless, no question about it. Dirty clothes, messy hair, carrying a backpack that probably contained all his worldly possessions. Richard had dealt with dozens of people like this over the years, and he knew the script by heart. Paul reached for the door handle, but before he could open it, Richard stepped forward and blocked his path from the inside. Through the glass, their eyes met. Paul smiled politely and pulled open the door. "Stop right there," Richard said, his voice hard and authoritative. He placed his hand up in a stopping gesture, the other hand resting on his radio as if he might need to call for backup. Paul paused, confused. "Good morning. I'm just heading inside." "No, you're not," Richard replied flatly. "This is private property. We don't allow solicitation, loitering, or vagrancy." Paul blinked, processing what was happening. "I'm not soliciting or loitering. I'm here to look at the mall." Richard let out a harsh laugh. "Look at the mall." "Right. Look, buddy, I've been doing this job a long time. I know exactly what you're here for. You want to panhandle from the customers? Maybe use the bathrooms? Probably look for an opportunity to steal something. It's not happening. Not on my watch." "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Paul said calmly. "I'm not here to cause any problems. I just want to walk through the building." "And I'm telling you that's not going to happen," Richard said, his voice getting louder. "This mall is for paying customers only. You want to come in here? You need to look presentable and have money to spend. You clearly have neither." Paul glanced down at his clothes, suddenly understanding the situation. "I know I'm not dressed well right now, but I have legitimate business here." "Business?" Richard repeated mockingly. "What kind of business? Let me guess you're here for a job interview?" He looked Paul up and down with exaggerated scrutiny. "Dressed like that? I don't think so." A few early morning mall walkers had stopped to watch the confrontation. Maria Rodriguez, opening her jewelry kiosk, looked over with concern. She recognized this pattern. She'd seen Richard do this before, and it always made her uncomfortable. "I'd rather not discuss my business with you," Paul said, his patience starting to wear thin. "I'm just asking to be allowed to enter a public commercial space." "It's not public," Richard corrected aggressively. "It's private property. And as the head of security, I have full authority to refuse entry to anyone I deem a threat to the safety and comfort of our legitimate customers and tenants." "A threat," Paul repeated. "What exactly about me is threatening?" Richard gestured broadly at Paul's appearance. "Everything. Your clothes are filthy. You're carrying a backpack. You look like you haven't showered in days. You fit the exact profile of someone we don't want in this mall." "The profile," Paul said quietly, and something in his tone made Richard slightly nervous, though he covered it with more aggression. "Yeah, the profile. I've been in security for over 20 years. I know trouble when I see it, and you are trouble. So do yourself a favor and leave before I have to call the police." Maria couldn't stay quiet anymore. She walked over from her kiosk. "Richard, what are you doing? This man hasn't done anything wrong." "Stay out of this, Maria," Richard snapped. "I'm doing my job, something you should appreciate, considering how much theft we prevent." "Theft?" Maria said incredulously. "Richard, we barely have any customers to steal from, and you're not preventing theft, you're preventing people from entering, people who don't belong here," Richard insisted. He turned back to Paul. "Last warning, leave now, or I'm calling the cops and having you arrested for trespassing." Paul reached slowly for his backpack, and Richard's hand immediately went to the pepper spray on his belt. "Don't make any sudden movements." "I'm just getting my identification," Paul said carefully. "I want to show you something that might clear this up." "I don't need to see your ID," Richard said. "I need to see you walking back to whatever cardboard box you crawled out of." The cruelty of the statement hung in the air. Several more shop owners had emerged from their stores now. Drawn by the commotion, Tom Chen stood outside his bookstore on the second floor, leaning over the railing to see what was happening. Paul took a deep breath, clearly struggling to maintain his composure. "Richard, is it? That's what your name tag says, Richard? I'm asking you one more time to let me enter this mall. I have legitimate business here, important business, and I'm telling you one more time to leave," Richard replied. "You want to come back when you've cleaned yourself up, gotten decent clothes, and can prove you have money to spend? Fine. But right now, you're not getting past this entrance, even if I show you documentation that proves I have business here." "Documentation?" Richard scoffed. "What? You've got a receipt from the dumpster out back? A permission slip from the homeless shelter? I don't care what kind of fake papers you think you have. You're not coming in." Paul's jaw tightened. "You're making a serious mistake. The only mistake would be letting you in and having you harass customers or steal from these struggling businesses." Richard shot back. "I'm protecting this mall. I'm protecting these shop owners. That's my job, and I take it seriously." "Do you?" Paul asked. "Because from where I'm standing, you're not protecting anyone. You're just exercising whatever small amount of power you have to make yourself feel important by hurting someone you've decided is beneath you." Richard's face flushed red with anger. "How dare you? You don't know anything about me or my job. I've worked here for 12 years. I've stopped real criminals. I've prevented real problems, and I'm not going to let some homeless bum lecture me about doing my job." "I'm not homeless," Paul said, his voice still calm but carrying steel underneath. "Could have fooled me," Richard retorted. "You sure look homeless, smell like it too." Maria gasped at the blatant cruelty. Tom Chen started descending the stairs, clearly intending to intervene, but before he could reach them, Paul made a decision. "Okay," Paul said. "I tried to do this quietly. I tried to respect your authority and handle this diplomatically, but you've left me no choice." He unzipped his backpack and pulled out a manila folder. From the folder, he extracted several documents, found the one he was looking for, and held it up so Richard could see it. "What's that?" Richard asked suspiciously. "This," Paul said clearly, "is the deed of ownership for Grandview Shopping Center. It was transferred to my name at 8:07 this morning, which means, Richard, that for the past hour and 8 minutes, I have been the sole owner of this property. The property you just refused to let me enter. The property where you just told me I don't belong." Richard's face went pale. "That's not possible. You're lying. That's a fake document." "It's not fake," Paul replied, "and I can prove it very easily. Why don't you call your management company?" "Oh wait, they're supposed to be moving out today, aren't they? Because they don't own this property anymore?" "I do." Maria's hand went to her mouth. Tom had reached the first floor and stood frozen, staring at the document in Paul's hand. The mall walkers who'd stopped to watch were whispering to each other in shocked disbelief. Richard grabbed for the document, but Paul held it out of reach. "I don't think so. You can look, but you can't touch." "This is insane," Richard said, but his voice had lost its authority. "Who are you? You can't be the new owner. The new owner is supposed to be some rich investor from downtown." "I am an investor," Paul said. "My name is Paul Walker, and yes, I bought this property for $42 million, paid in full this morning." Recognition flickered across several faces in the growing crowd. "Paul Walker, the actor?" Tom Chen's eyes widened. Maria let out a small sound of understanding. Richard just looked confused and terrified. "You're Paul Walker?" Richard repeated. "The movie star?" "I'm Paul Walker," he confirmed, "but that's not really relevant here. What's relevant is that I own this mall. I tried to enter my own property, and you physically prevented me from doing so while insulting me, mocking my appearance, threatening me with arrest, and making assumptions about my character based entirely on how I'm dressed." Richard's hand was shaking now. "I didn't know. How was I supposed to know? You look like what?" Paul interrupted. "Like I'm not worthy of basic human respect? Like I'm less than you? Like I'm someone who deserves to be treated with contempt and cruelty?" "I was just doing my job," Richard said weakly. "Your job is to provide security," Paul replied, his voice hard now. "Not to judge people, not to decide who's worthy of entering based on their appearance, not to exercise petty tyranny over people you perceive as powerless. Tom Chen finally found his voice. Mr. Walker, I'm Tom Chen. I own the bookstore upstairs. On behalf of the decent people here, I want to apologize for what you just experienced. Richard's behavior has been a problem for a long time. Many of us have complained to management, but nothing was ever done. Because management didn't care, Paul said. Because this place has been dying and nobody wanted to invest the time or money to fix it. Well, that's about to change. Richard was sweating now, the full weight of his mistake settling onto his shoulders like concrete. Mr. Walker, sir, I apologize. I truly didn't know who you were. If you'd just told me from the beginning, if I'd told you I was Paul Walker, then you would have treated me with respect? Paul asked, his voice sharp. But because I looked like someone you deemed unworthy, someone you assumed was homeless, you felt entitled to treat me like garbage? That's exactly the problem, Richard. You should have treated me with respect, regardless of who I am. Not because I'm famous, not because I'm rich, not because I own this building, but because I'm a human being who deserves basic dignity. Maria stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. Mr. Walker, I've been here for 7 years. I've watched Richard do this to dozens of people who were just trying to shop, trying to walk through the mall to get somewhere else, trying to get out of the rain or heat. He profiles them based on appearance, and he removes them. It's been terrible for business, and it's been terrible for this community's reputation. How many people? Paul asked, looking directly at Richard. How many people have you thrown out of this mall based on nothing but how they looked? Richard opened his mouth, then closed it. His face had gone from pale to red with shame. I don't know. I didn't keep count. I was just trying to maintain standards, to keep the mall safe and welcoming for real customers. Real customers, Paul repeated. Define a real customer for me, Richard. What does one look like? Someone who has money, Richard said, then immediately realized how it sounded. I mean, someone who is here to actually shop, not to cause problems or make people uncomfortable. And you, determine all of that from a glance? Paul asked. You can tell someone's bank balance, their intentions, their character, all from their clothing and appearance? It's not like that, Richard protested weakly. Then what is it like? Paul pressed. Explain to me the logic you used when you looked at me this morning. Walk me through your thought process. Richard looked around desperately, as if someone might rescue him from this conversation, but the growing crowd of shop owners and early morning visitors just stared at him, waiting. I saw someone who looked homeless, dirty clothes, messy appearance, backpack. In my experience, people who look like that are usually trouble. In your experience, Paul said. Let me tell you about my experience this morning, Richard. I was at Hope Mission downtown from 6 to 8:30. I was serving breakfast to 63 people experiencing homelessness. I helped cook scrambled eggs for a woman named Dorothy, who's 74 years old and has been on the streets for 3 months since her apartment building was condemned. I carried food trays for a man named Marcus, who lost his job as an accountant after a mental health crisis and is trying to rebuild his life. I cleaned tables alongside a teenager named Jasmine who aged out of foster care and has nowhere to go. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Those people are why my clothes are dirty, Paul continued. That work is why I look tired and disheveled. I came from a place where I was trying to serve people with dignity and respect, and I walked into a building I own only to be treated exactly the way society treats them every single day, with suspicion, with contempt, with the assumption that they're somehow less than human. Tom Chen spoke up again. Mr. Walker, what you're describing is exactly what we've been trying to tell management for years. Richard's attitude doesn't just hurt the people he removes, it hurts all of us. It creates an atmosphere of exclusion and judgment. It drives away the very sense of community that a place like this should foster. Richard's voice was barely a whisper now. I'm sorry. I truly am. I made a terrible mistake. You made many terrible mistakes, Paul corrected. And the worst part is that you're only sorry because of who I turned out to be. If I really had been homeless, if I really had been someone with no power or resources, you wouldn't be apologizing right now. You'd be congratulating yourself for successfully removing an undesirable element. That's not true, Richard protested, but there was no conviction in his voice. Isn't it? Maria said sharply. Richard, I watched you last month forcibly remove a woman who was waiting by the entrance for her daughter to pick her up. She was well dressed, but you didn't like that she was sitting on the floor, You assumed she was loitering? She was 70 years old, Richard. She was sitting because her legs hurt, but you made her leave. You embarrassed her in front of everyone. And 2 weeks ago, Tom added, you threw out a teenager who was looking at books in my store. You said he looked suspicious. He was black, wearing a hoodie, and reading a book about civil rights. That was his crime. Reading while black. More shop owners began speaking up, each sharing stories of Richard's profiling, his aggressive tactics, his pattern of judging and removing people based on appearance, race, age, or perceived economic status. The picture that emerged was of a man who had turned his small amount of authority into a weapon of exclusion and discrimination. Paul listened to each story, his expression growing darker. When the testimonies finally ended, he turned back to Richard. You've been running your own little kingdom here, haven't you? Making your own rules about who belongs and who doesn't. And nobody stopped you because this place was dying anyway. So why would corporate care if you were making it worse? I thought I was protecting the mall, Richard said, and he seemed to genuinely believe it. Even now, I thought I was doing the right thing. That's the scariest part, Paul replied. You really thought you were right. You built an entire worldview where treating people with cruelty and suspicion was somehow noble, where exercising power over powerless people was somehow heroic. A new voice spoke from the edge of the crowd. Excuse me? A woman in her 30s stepped forward, her eyes red from crying. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I've been standing here listening, and I need to say something. Paul gestured for her to continue. Please, my name is Sarah Mitchell. 3 months ago, I came to this mall with my 2 children. We just left an abusive situation. We were staying at a shelter nearby. I'd gotten my first paycheck from a new job, and I wanted to do something normal with my kids, something that felt like we were a regular family. We were going to get ice cream and maybe look at the toy store. Tears were running down her face now. Several people in the crowd were also crying. This man, Sarah pointed at Richard, stopped us at the entrance. He said we looked like we didn't belong. He said we looked suspicious. My son asked me why the security guard was being mean to us. My daughter, who's 5 years old, asked me if we were bad people. I had to explain to my children that sometimes people judge you based on how you look, and that there's nothing we could do about it except leave. Richard had tears running down his face now too. I remember, he whispered. I remember them. I thought they might be part of some scam, people using kids to panhandle or steal. I thought I was protecting the mall. You were protecting the mall from a woman and 2 children who just wanted ice cream, Sarah said, her voice breaking. Do you have any idea what that did to my kids? Do you know how hard I'd been working to make them feel safe again, to make them feel like they mattered, to make them believe the world wasn't entirely cruel? And you destroyed that in 5 minutes. Paul walked over to Sarah and spoke to her gently. I'm so sorry that happened to you and your children. That never should have happened, and I promise you it won't happen again. He turned back to Richard. Here's what's going to happen. First, you're fired. Effective immediately, you'll be escorted off the property and banned from returning. Richard's legs seemed to give out. He sat down hard on a nearby bench. Please, he said, please, this is my job. I've worked here for 12 years. I have rent to pay. I have bills. I need this job. You should have thought about that before you spent 12 years abusing your authority, Paul said, his voice hard. How many people did you hurt? How many Sarah Mitchells and her children? How many elderly people just trying to rest? How many young people just trying to exist in public space? You turned this mall into a place of exclusion and pain, and you're going to face consequences for that. But what will I do? Richard asked, his voice desperate. I'm 53 years old. Who's going to hire me now? Paul looked at him for a long moment. That's the question you should ask yourself every time you treat someone badly. What if you were in their position? What if you were the one being judged, excluded, humiliated? How would you want to be treated? Tom Chen spoke up. Mr. Walker, what are your plans for the mall? Are you going to renovate and reopen? Paul nodded, grateful for the change of subject. Yes, major renovations starting in 3 weeks, but more than physical changes. I'm changing the entire philosophy of this place. Grandview is going to become a community center. We'll have retail space, yes, but also job training programs, GED classes, mental health resources, a food bank, meeting spaces for community organizations. Everything will be designed to serve this neighborhood, not extract money from it. The shop owners looked at each other with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Maria voiced what many were thinking. Does that mean we'll be able to stay? Our leases. Not only can you stay, Paul assured her, but your rent is being reduced by 40% immediately, and any other small business owner in this community who wants affordable retail space can apply. This mall is going to be full again, but full of local entrepreneurs and community services, not chain stores that don't care about this neighborhood." The crowd erupted in applause and excited chatter. Tom was grinning. Maria was crying, happy tears. Sarah was smiling for the first time since she'd stepped forward. Richard sat on his bench, his head in his hands, the weight of his actions finally crushing him. Paul walked over and sat down next to him. "Richard, do you understand why you're being fired?" "Because I didn't recognize you," Richard said miserably. "No," Paul corrected firmly. "That's not why. You're being fired because for 12 years you've been treating people with cruelty and discrimination. You're being fired because you created an environment of exclusion and fear. You're being fired because you had the opportunity every single day to be kind, to be fair, to treat people with dignity, and you chose the opposite." Richard nodded slowly. I know I was wrong. I just didn't see it until now." "That's your problem right there," Paul said. "You didn't see it until it affected you personally. Until your actions had consequences for you, you couldn't see the harm you were causing to others, because you'd convinced yourself they didn't matter as much as you did." "What can I do?" Richard asked. "How can I fix this?" Paul thought for a moment. "You start by really understanding what you did wrong. Not just that you misjudged me, but that you've spent years misjudging people. You built your entire sense of self-worth on having power over others. You need to figure out why you did that, and who you want to be instead." "I don't even know where to start," Richard admitted. "Start with apologies," Paul suggested. "Real ones. Sarah Mitchell is standing right over there. Go apologize to her and her children, and mean it. Then start thinking about all the other people you hurt, and if you can find them, apologize to them too." Richard stood up slowly and walked over to Sarah. She looked at him warily, protectively stepping slightly in front of an imaginary space where her children would have been. "Ms. Mitchell," Richard said, his voice shaking, "I am so deeply sorry for what I did to you and your children. There's no excuse for it. I was cruel and wrong, and I hurt people who were already hurting. I'm sorry." Sarah studied his face for a long moment. "I don't forgive you yet," she said honestly, "but I appreciate the apology. I hope you learn from this. I hope you become better." Richard nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I will. I promise. I will." As Richard gathered his belongings and prepared to leave, Paul addressed the growing crowd of shop owners, mall walkers, and curious onlookers. "I want everyone here to understand something. What happened this morning wasn't just about one security guard making one mistake. It was about a system that allowed discrimination to continue unchecked. It was about a culture that valued appearances over humanity, and it's about to change completely." He pulled out a stack of business cards from his backpack. "I'm going to be here every day for the next few weeks overseeing the transition. If any of you have ideas for how to make this space better serve the community, I want to hear them. If you know people who need job training or resources, send them to me. If you have concerns or suggestions, my door is open. Literally, my office is going to be right there." He pointed to a vacant storefront near the entrance. "Glass walls, no barriers. I want everyone to know that they're welcome here, that they belong here, that this is their space." Tom raised his hand. "Mr. Walker, I have a question. Why? Why did you buy this place? You're a successful actor. You could invest in anything. Why a dying mall in a transitional neighborhood?" Paul smiled. "Because of exactly what you just said? It's a transitional neighborhood. People are moving here who need community support. Families are settling here who need resources. This mall is perfectly positioned to serve them, but only if it's designed with that purpose in mind. I'm not trying to make a fortune off this place. I'm trying to create something that actually matters." Maria spoke up. "You mentioned job training programs. What kind of jobs?" "All kinds," Paul replied. "Retail, obviously, but also trades. We're going to have a workshop space where people can learn carpentry, plumbing, electrical work. We're partnering with community colleges for certification programs. We're creating a commercial kitchen where people can learn culinary skills and potentially start their own food businesses. The goal is to give people real skills that lead to real jobs." "And the people you were serving breakfast to this morning?" someone asked. "The people experiencing homelessness? Will they be welcome here?" "Absolutely," Paul said firmly. "Everyone will be welcome here. No profiling, no discrimination, no judgment based on appearance or economic status. We'll have social workers on site who can connect people with housing resources, job opportunities, mental health services. This mall is going to be a hub where people can get help, not a place where they're turned away. The conversation continued for another hour, with Paul patiently answering questions, taking notes on suggestions, and building relationships with the people who would form the core of this new community center. By the time the crowd finally dispersed, Paul had dozens of business cards in his pocket, a notebook full of ideas, and a clear sense that he'd made the right decision in buying this property. As people filtered back to their shops and routines, Tom Chen lingered behind. "Mr. Walker, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course," Paul replied. "When Richard was treating you that way, blocking the entrance, insulting you, threatening you, why didn't you just tell him immediately who you were? Why did you let it go on for so long?" Paul considered the question carefully. "Because I wanted to see how far he would go. I wanted to understand what people experience when they don't have the privilege of being recognized or having power. If I'd pulled the 'don't you know who I am' card, right away Richard would have apologized and let me in, but he wouldn't have learned anything. He wouldn't have been forced to confront the reality of his behavior. That was a risk, though," Tom observed. "What if he'd called the police? What if they'd arrested you?" "Then I would have dealt with it," Paul said simply. "And honestly, that would have been valuable too. It would have exposed even more clearly how the system treats people based on appearance. But I had my documentation. I knew I could prove my ownership if it became necessary. I just wanted to give Richard every opportunity to show his true character. And he did." Tom nodded thoughtfully. "You know, most people in your position would have just fired him immediately and moved on. The fact that you took the time to talk to him, to try to make him understand what he did wrong, that says a lot about you." "I don't know if it will make a difference," Paul admitted. "Richard has spent decades building up these prejudices. One conversation probably won't undo all of that, but maybe it will plant a seed. Maybe the next time he's tempted to judge someone by their appearance, he'll remember this morning and choose differently." "And if he doesn't?" Tom asked. "Then at least he's not in a position where he can hurt people anymore," Paul replied. "That's the minimum requirement. You can't force people to be good, but you can make sure they don't have the power to cause harm." Over the next 3 weeks, Grandview Shopping Center underwent a transformation that was both physical and philosophical. Construction crews worked to repair years of neglect, but more importantly, Paul worked to build relationships with the community. He held town halls where residents could voice their needs and ideas. He met with social service organizations to coordinate resources. He interviewed dozens of people for the new security team, making it clear that the job was about welcoming and assisting, not excluding and intimidating. Sarah Mitchell, the woman who'd shared her story about being turned away with her children, became one of Paul's key advisors. She understood the needs of families in transition, and she had insights about what resources would make the biggest difference. Paul hired her as the community outreach coordinator, giving her an office right next to his glass-walled workspace. Maria's jewelry kiosk became one of the anchors of the new retail section, along with Tom's bookstore. But they were joined by dozens of new vendors, local entrepreneurs who'd never been able to afford traditional retail space, a woman who made handmade soaps, a teenager who customized sneakers, a retired teacher who sold educational toys and books, an immigrant family who operated a small cafe serving food from their home country. The job training programs launched with 20 participants, people referred by homeless shelters, community organizations, and word of mouth. They learned in the mornings and worked in the mall in the afternoons, gaining real experience while earning wages. Several major employers in the area had partnered with Paul, agreeing to interview and potentially hire program graduates. The food bank opened in what had once been a failed department store. It was designed to look like a grocery store, allowing people to shop for what they needed rather than receiving pre-packed boxes, preserving dignity while meeting needs. Social workers were available on site to help connect people with additional resources like housing assistance, job placement, and healthcare. And every single person who entered Grandview, whether they were shopping or seeking services, whether they were dressed in designer clothes or worn-out sneakers, whether they arrived in luxury cars or on foot, was greeted with the same warm welcome and treated with the same respect. 2 months after the transformation began, Paul was sitting in his glass office reviewing some paperwork when he noticed a familiar figure hesitating outside the mall entrance. It was Richard Morrison. He looked different, thinner, more worn, but it was definitely him. Paul watched as Richard stood there for several minutes, clearly debating whether to come inside. Finally, Richard took a deep breath and walked through the entrance. He stopped just inside, looking around at the changes with visible amazement. The dingy corridors had been painted in warm, welcoming colors. The broken tiles had been replaced. The flickering lights were now bright and steady, and everywhere, there, were people browsing the shops, attending classes, getting help at the resource center. Paul stood up and walked out of his office. "Richard," he called out. Richard jumped, then turned to face Paul. "Mr. Walker, I didn't think you'd want to see me. Come to my office," Paul said. "Let's talk." They sat across from each other, separated by Paul's simple desk. Richard looked uncomfortable, ashamed, but also determined. "I wanted to come by and see what you'd done with the place," he said. "Everyone's talking about it, how you've transformed it, how it's become this amazing community resource." "It's getting there," Paul replied. "We still have a long way to go, but yes, it's becoming what I hoped it would be." "I also wanted to apologize again," Richard continued. "A real apology this time, not just because you're Paul Walker or because you fired me, but because I genuinely understand now what I was doing wrong all those years. I've spent the past 2 months thinking about everyone I hurt, everyone I judged, everyone I made feel unwelcome, and I'm horrified by the person I was." Paul studied him carefully. "What changed? What made you really understand?" "I experienced it myself," Richard admitted. "I've been job hunting. I'm wearing my best clothes, carrying my resume, trying my hardest to present well, and I keep getting turned away. Not because I'm unqualified, but because I'm 53, because I have a gap in my employment, because people look at me and make assumptions, and every time it happens, I think about all the people I did that to, all the snap judgments I made, all the hurt I caused. That's called empathy," Paul said gently. "Understanding how your actions affect others because you've experienced something similar yourself." "I should have had that empathy before," Richard said. "I shouldn't have needed to suffer myself to understand that I was causing suffering. That's what makes it worse. I had no excuse for treating people the way I did." Paul leaned back in his chair. "Richard, why are you really here? What do you want from me?" "Nothing," Richard said quickly. "I don't want my job back. I don't deserve it. I don't want money or forgiveness or anything like that. I just wanted you to know that your actions that day, the way you handled the situation, it changed me. It forced me to look at myself honestly for the first time in years, and while it's been painful and difficult, I'm grateful for it." "What are you going to do now?" Paul asked. "I don't know yet," Richard admitted. "I'm still figuring that out, but whatever I do, I'm going to be better. I'm going to treat people the way I wish I'd been treated. I'm going to use whatever small amount of influence or authority I have to help people, not hurt them." Paul nodded slowly, then made a decision. "Come with me. I want to show you something." He led Richard through the mall, pointing out the various programs and initiatives. The job training workshop where people were learning carpentry, the classroom where GED classes were held, the food bank that looked like a grocery store, the childcare center where parents could leave their kids safely while they shopped or attended classes or looked for work, the medical clinic offering free basic health care, the legal aid office helping people with housing issues and employment discrimination. All of this, Paul said, exists because I refuse to accept that people should be judged by their appearance or economic status, because I believe everyone deserves dignity and opportunity, because I think community is more important than profit. Richard's eyes were filled with tears again. "This is incredible. This is what Grandview should have been all along." "Yes," Paul agreed, "and you could have been part of making it that. You had the power to make people feel welcome. You had the authority to create a culture of inclusion, but you chose the opposite. You chose exclusion and judgment." "I know," Richard whispered. "I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." They walked back toward the entrance, and Paul stopped. At the security station, a woman in her 30s was working there, reviewing cameras and greeting people warmly. "Richard, this is Angela. She's our head of security now." Angela extended her hand and Richard shook it. "Nice to meet you," she said genuinely. "Angela has a different approach to security than you did," Paul explained. "Her job is to help people feel safe and welcome, to assist anyone who needs directions or support, to handle problems with de-escalation and compassion rather than aggression and exclusion, and it works beautifully." "I'm sure it does," Richard said, looking at Angela with respect. "I'm sure this place is so much better than it was when I was here." As they reached the entrance, Paul turned to Richard one final time. "I hope you find work. I hope you find a place where you can use what you've learned to make a positive difference. And I hope you never forget the lesson you learned here, that every person you meet deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of how they look or what you assume about them." "I won't forget," Richard promised. "How could I? He walked out of Grandview Shopping Center, and Paul watched him go, hoping that the transformation in Richard was real and lasting. But whether it was or not, Paul had created something important here, a place where people weren't judged, where community came. First, where dignity was universal, and every time Paul walked through those entrance doors, whether he was dressed in expensive clothes or wearing his volunteer work outfit, whether he arrived in a luxury car or on foot, he was greeted with warmth and respect, not because he was Paul Walker the actor, not because he owned the building, but because he was a human being entering a space designed to honor the humanity in everyone. That was the real transformation, not the fresh paint or new lighting or successful programs, but the fundamental shift in values, from exclusion to inclusion, from judgment to compassion, from profit over people to people over profit. Grandview had become what Paul had envisioned, a place where everyone truly belonged.